Hello, Marky Dragon, also known as Marcus Eikenberry in real life, and I had mentioned before that I was asked questions about the $250,000 and $500,000 loss that I had taken in a couple of entrepreneurial activities that I had done, and many of you said, "Hey, I'd like to hear those stories." I don't mind telling these stories because, really, there's lessons to be learned from them, and so this one is definitely about a big loss, $500,000. But before I forget, because sometimes I forget to give these codes away, Blackshot Europe, here's a code for it. Click the link in the description and you can sign up an account. It is free to play. This one, I like this one because it's the Silver Dragon bundle. Dragon being the key word. Anyway, so back to the big losses. So back in 2007, I decided, maybe it was 2006, I decided to open a limousine service. And I was into the video game codes and, selling stuff and opened the limousine service to, basically, I wanted to diversify where my income sources were coming in from, and so that you have multiple sources, so that if one thing is affected by something, that it you don't lose your job. Being self-employed, being an entrepreneur, that's an issue. And so I decided that since I had been a limousine driver in my early 20s, and that I thought, why not? I enjoyed driving limousine, and I knew the etiquette of it. I knew, how to operate the vehicles and all of that stuff. And I thought, I can do this. So we set forth and made a limousine company. And it was, I made some very poor choices in this. Now, I don't know how much money we spent out. Well over $500,000. We bought... I bought a limousine called the Money Suck, and we named it that because it kept breaking down. And in fact, one of the first times that it went out, it was an H1 Hummer limousine, and it sat, I think, 24 people. So many people that we had to register it as a bus. It was enormous, but it had some issues. Like, I bought it from North Carolina. Now, I don't know the topography of North Carolina very well, but do they have many hills? Mountains? Well, problem we instantly ran into the first time we got it in service, which was after we had poured about another $10,000 into repairs into it, after I paid, $50,000 for the limo. I bought it used. And they were coming down this hill, in the West Hills in Portland, and lost the brakes. And so you have to be careful with large vehicles like that because you can overheat the brakes, and when you overheat the brakes, they won't stop, and it loses its bite. And so they came down the hill, and they blew a red light at the bottom of the hill. Now, anyone who's a commercial vehicle driver knows about that. The person who was driving that, he was an airline pilot, but he got his CDL. And so maybe he didn't have a whole lot of experience in driving vehicles with a heavy load down big hills like that. Because what you would do is you'd switch down into gears. And in like the H1, he would have been in maybe first gear if it was bad enough. And that would have you coming down the hill at 15 miles an hour. But it would also keep you from blowing that light at the bottom of the hill. So, anyway, that one never made its money. We had it out only a few times. It had problems every time, and we really lost confidence in that vehicle. And so it was not rented out a bunch, maybe 20, 30 times. I bought a couple of more used limos. I bought a Ford Excursion limo, which sat, I think, 14 people. And then we also had an old Lincoln Continental that sat, I think, 6. And it was smart of us to go with the used vehicles. We made much more money off of those than the new vehicles. As far as new vehicles, we purchased a brand new Hummer. and we sent it to Legendary Coachworks in Florida, and they cut it in half. They extended it out, and in fact they added a tandem axle in the back, and it was very, very impressive. If I'm able to find my pictures, I will show some of them in this video. Hopefully I'm able to find those pictures. The car cost us well over $150,000. And, Hummer itself, just a basic model, H2 at that time, was around $65,000 or $70,000. And so we spent, somewhere around $80,000, $70,000 or $80,000 in modifications to this vehicle. Then we also bought a Chrysler 300, which was an 8-passenger, and we had them both custom painted, and they looked really sharp. They were really great. And one of the reasons why I opened this limo company is because I wanted to be able to ride in a limo. I wanted somebody else to ferry me around from time to time. And that's the wrong reason to do one of these things. So, but you learn from those things. So in 2007, we were up and running. Our cost of operations was around $18,000 a month to operate the company. We were fully licensed to do these big vehicles. You had to pay well for good chauffeurs. And then the vehicle licensing. And insurance, we did everything by the book. We did everything proper. What we found is that much of our competition, not all of them, but a good deal of them that were undercutting us on price, they were undercutting us because they weren't buying the proper insurance for their vehicles. They were claiming that their vehicles were like 14 passengers or less, and when they're 15 passengers or above, it was a $5 million policy on them. When they're 14 or less, it was much, much less, like $1 million. And so the insurance, so you think $1 million policy? $5 million policy. $5 million policy is not quite 5 times higher than $1 million policy in the cost of it, but it is much more expensive. And we found that we made some other mistakes, like we found that if you have one commercial vehicle federally, that all of your vehicles must be buses. So we had to insure all of our vehicles at this higher rate. Was not a very good move on our part. We should have stayed with one class or the other. Or we should have made 2 different companies and just used the same phone number and dispatch, but billed it through 2 different companies. And so in 2007, the economy was starting to take a dive. And when they announced that we were officially in recession, that is when sales really plummeted. And we got to the point where we were losing $13,000 a month. And that's even while operating. We couldn't make enough money to cover everything. And we figured out that and the numbers kept lowering with the economy being the way it was. And we figured out that if we were to just shut it down, we would be about $8,000 to $10,000 a month in losses than this 13 by operating. So we decided to close our doors because the recession wasn't quitting. And in fact, some could question whether or not we're even out of the recession yet. And because of that, we decided we were just going to close our doors and liquidate. Well, selling the cars, like the limousine that I paid $150,000 for, I sold it for $75,000. That was the best I could get for it, and all of them. The used limos in the beginning, we got a little bit better value out of them, but the new ones, we didn't get the value at all. So it ended up being around a $500,000 loss. So this is one that I had talked about, the no-brainer, before in some things, and we used that for this company. But then there were other circumstances that went beyond our control, and sometimes circumstances that go beyond your control, shutting down is the proper course, and that's what we believed with this. Would I do a limousine company again? I'm not so sure I would. If you go back and look at my early videos on this channel, like go back to like the 3rd or 4th video that I ever posted on here, you'll see limousine videos, me talking about the limousine company and everything, and you'll actually see some of the cars in there. And I'm not sure that I would do this again. I learned a lot from it. And if this were education and I had a degree, I'd have a degree, up on my wall that cost me $500,000. But that is, that's just the price of being an entrepreneur and trying things. And nowadays, I work just a little bit harder to be a little bit more sure about my markets. Now, if we hadn't gone into recession, I think that we would have done better. I don't know if we would have been successful, but I think we would have done better. And there's some other things that we did too, like our market was Portland, Oregon, and this big car that we had, this really big one that we needed to rent out for like $250 an hour. The market couldn't bear that here. In Las Vegas, which is where you would see a limousine like this, it could bear that, but in Portland it was hard to rent out, and we ended up renting it out at $150 an hour and such. So we weren't getting out of it what we needed to make the payments on it. So those are the types of lessons, though, that make us better in business and help us grow, get wiser, and they're just very expensive education. I try to keep my losses now a lot smaller. I'm Marky Dragon. Take care.